This teen took revenge on his ex in the most horrific way. On June 3rd, 17-year-old Madison Shimitz was stabbed by her ex-boyfriend, 18-year-old Spencer Pearson, outside a restaurant in Jacksonville. On this day, Madison, her mother Jackie, and a friend were sitting at a restaurant named Mr. Chubby's Wings when they noticed Spencer sitting at a table not too far from them. You see, Madison and Spencer had been broken up for a couple of months now, but he has been harassing her by following her to school and leaving notes on her car. So when they spotted Spencer sitting close to them at the restaurant, they quickly left. Spencer followed Madison and her mother to the parking lot. He threw Madison to the ground and began stabbing her. Madison was stabbed 15 times. Many of these wounds hit her back, which caused her to be paralyzed. Madison's mother was also stabbed in the head and leg while she tried to protect her daughter. This man who happened to be there intervened and tried to stop Spencer, and as a result, he was stabbed in the hand. When police were on their way, Spencer slit his throat in an attempt to take his own life, but he was unsuccessful. Spencer has been charged with 2 counts of attempted premeditated murder and aggravated battery with a deadly weapon.
I dismembered my own father and turned his body into a TV cabinet. If you're squeamish, leave the video immediately because what follows is even more horrifying. My name is Nathan Robinson. On May 16, 2013 in Bournemouth, everything turned upside down. I had a huge debt of 40,000 euros to my father, William, a man who had always had a toxic hold on me. That day, unable to pay him back, and overwhelmed by his constant threats and humiliations, I lost control. Using a Stanley knife and saws, I cut up my father, a man of 183 meters and 160 kilo. I then placed the pieces in plastic boxes, creating a piece of furniture for my TV. I went on with my life, sending messages from his phone, making his friends and family believe that he'd decided to move elsewhere, that he'd met someone in Scotland and was happy. I even used his credit card to buy myself a trip to Scotland, playing the grieving son searching for traces of his missing father. But the demons of the past never stay hidden for long. A month later, following a stench reported by the neighbors, the police discovered the horror in our apartment. The boxes, the furniture, the remains. Everything told the story of my unthinkable act. Today, locked up behind bars, I'm serving a 30-year sentence for this crime. Every night, the memories haunt me, and my father's face stares back at me from the darkness.
There has been an absolutely horrific murder this week that was live streamed on Instagram. This case is extremely disturbing, so please be warned before watching. On Friday, 12,000 people watched a Bosnian bodybuilder kill his wife on Instagram Live. 35-year-old Nermin had been abusing his wife during their marriage, and the pair had a young child. On Friday morning, he took to Instagram Live to tell his followers that they could witness a live killing. Absolutely horrifically, he turns the camera to his ex, whose face is completely covered in blood and disfigured. He calls her a derogatory name and blames her for her own death because she reported him to police. Disturbingly, you can hear the child crying in the background. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week and reported him to police for DV. So in my opinion, yes, she's taking steps to keep her and her child safe from you. After shooting his wife in the head on Instagram, he then goads his followers saying, "Someone come and save the child." A police chase then began and he went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he's killed 2 other people who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He also wounded a police officer, another man and a woman while on the run. He ended up unaliving himself on the same day.
I was the hottest model around, but my last photo shoot turned into a bloody nightmare. If you're sensitive, skip it. My name is Lila Martins. The offer of a photo shoot on a luxury yacht in the Caribbean was irresistible, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited me. On the first day, everything seemed perfect, but as soon as night fell, I heard whispers, muffled laughter, and thuds coming from nearby cabins. A metallic smell hung in the air, that of fresh blood. On the 3rd day, after a photo shoot on deck, I was lured into the yacht's hold by a crew member. Before I could scream, a gloved hand slammed me against a wall, a sharp knife pressed against my throat. I felt the cold of the blade dig into my skin, warm blood trickling down my neck. When I regained consciousness, I was tied up, blindfolded, hearing the waves crashing against the yacht's hull. I felt something heavy and sharp come down on me repeatedly, tearing my skin, breaking my bones. My mutilated body was thrown overboard, abandoned to the depths of the ocean. The police investigated, but the culprit was never found. Today, I want my story to serve as a warning. Even in glamour and luxury, evil can lurk around every corner.
This case has really shocked me, not just because of the horrific injuries that this beautiful baby sustained, but also because of the ridiculously short sentence that her parents received. Ava Mae Collard was just 5 months old when she was squeezed so tightly that she stopped breathing and suffered a cardiac arrest.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing? Is the patient breathing?
She later died in hospital, and as she was laid fighting for her life, her father went home to get rid of the drugs that he'd been growing at their home in Stafford. Little Ava Mae was exposed to cannabis multiple times during her short life and suffered extensive injuries in the 5 months that she was alive. Her parents, Joshua Collard and Rebecca Grocott, were arrested on March 25, 2020, and both said they had absolutely no idea how Ava Mae's injuries were sustained. At the time of her death, Ava had 28 rib fractures, as well as a fractured collarbone and femur. She also had trauma to the side of her head, which had caused an ear injury, and she had bruises on her scalp, face and legs. The court heard that Josh was an ill-tempered misogynist, and he showed absolutely no remorse for what had happened to his daughter. Ava Mae was actually known to social services, and both them and her mother Rebecca did absolutely nothing to stop in and protect her. In 2020, Rebecca received 8 years in prison and Joshua received 11 years in prison. If, like me, you don't think these sentences are anywhere near long enough for the death of Ava Mae, you'll be shocked to hear that they only have to serve half of those sentences before they can apply for parole, meaning Rebecca might be out in just over a year and Joshua might be out in just over 2.5 years.
He performed plastic surgery on himself after murdering his teacher. In 2006, 22-year-old British teacher Lindsay Hawker moved to Tokyo to teach English at Chiba University. A year later, 28-year-old student Tetsuya Ichihashi asked Lindsay if he could receive private lessons from her. Lindsay agreed, and they met at a coffee shop a few days later for their first session. At the end of the session, Tetsuya told Lindsay he forgot his money at home and asked her to go back to his place to pick it up and pay her. So that's exactly what they did, and unfortunately, Lindsay never made it out of Tetsuya's apartment. Lindsay was reported missing the next day, so police went to Tetsuya's apartment and saw him escape by foot. When police entered Tetsuya's balcony, they found Lindsay's deceased body in a bath full of sand. Tetsuya then went into hiding for 2.5 years, and he went to extreme measures to avoid authorities, such as physically changing his appearance himself. This included cutting off the moles from his face with a knife, trimming his lips to make them thinner, and reshaping his nose. All these changes allowed Tetsuya to be undetected for years, but his attempt to alter his appearance even more led to his arrest when a cosmetic doctor became suspicious about his scars and reported him to police. At Tetsuya's trial, he confessed to everything and was sentenced to life in prison.
Guys, we found a suitcase at the
Gotta go. I'll hold your stuff.
Go. Wait, open it. Open it. It stinks, y'all.
So if you don't remember this story, back in 2020, a young woman and her group of friends were filming a TikTok video while they were using the app Randonautica. Now, if you don't know what Randonautica is, it's an app where you put in some sort of an intention, like scary, and it gives you a set of coordinates to go on some sort of little mini adventure. And on that day, those people had randomly gone out on a Randonautica adventure and had been sent to those coordinates where they discovered suitcases. And inside of those suitcases, shockingly, were 2 sets of human remains. Eventually, those remains were identified as belonging to Jessica Lewis and Austin Wenner. They were 2 locals who lived in the Seattle area, and they had gone missing prior to this discovery. After some investigation, it was revealed that these 2 had gotten themselves involved in some sort of criminal activities, but still the question remained, who had killed them? Well, it was this man, 65-year-old Michael Dudley, a landlord in the Seattle area. As it turns out, he was the landlord for the 2 victims, and some sort of altercation had occurred on June 9th, 2020. On that day, according to further investigation, Michael Dudley had gotten into an argument with Jessica and Austin. And after this argument, he went upstairs to the bedroom that Austin and Jessica were renting. He shot them both to death, most likely for not paying rent and being involved in this criminal activity that they were bringing into his home. But disturbingly, Michael then took this a step further, and instead of just burying their bodies somewhere, he decided to dismember them. That's right, he then dismembered these 2 adult human bodies, stuffed them into suitcases, and tried to dispose of them in 2 different waterways in the Seattle area. Now, Michael was eventually caught and arrested for this crime, and eventually after the trial, he was sentenced to 46 years in prison. And with him being 65 years old already, this is practically a death sentence. I just remember seeing this video when it was first released and it was making its rounds on social media and thinking that can't possibly be true. But in this case, the actual reality of the situation was darker than any sort of fictional situation I could have ever imagined.
On June 27, 2021, a woman stumbled across a decapitated body in some woodland, and this woman, Gemma Mitchell, became the #1 murder suspect. The victim was 67-year-old Deborah Chong, who lived in Wembley, North London, 400 miles away from where her body had just been found. Deborah was a widow originally from Malaysia who lived in the UK for 30 years. She was described by a friend as having a sweet, childlike nature, but Deborah was also a very vulnerable woman. She'd met Gemma Mitchell at the church that they both attended, and they'd struck up a close friendship. In mid-2021, Gemma and her mum were having their house renovated when they ran into some financial difficulty. Deborah kindly offered to pay for all the building work, but she later withdrew her offer, and then she went missing. After the gruesome discovery of Deborah's body, police started searching CCTV in both Devon and London, and they soon identified Gemma as a suspect. This was Gemma on the day that Deborah disappeared, wheeling a large suitcase towards Deborah's house. And the clip that I'm about to play is Gemma that same day walking away from Deborah's house. Police believed that Deborah's body was inside that suitcase, and Gemma was then seen loading it into a 4x4 and driving it down to Salcombe, where Deborah's body was found. She then returned home over 200 miles away on the same day. The circumstantial evidence was stacked against Gemma, but shockingly there was no forensic evidence whatsoever. Gemma was arrested, but in her police interview, she answered no comment to every single question. She took no responsibility for Deborah's murder, but would she be found guilty? I found this case so interesting to research, and over on Crime and Investigation Play, they go into it in a lot more detail with a 2-part documentary, Body in the Suitcase, The Murder of Deborah Chong. It's an absolute must-watch, and if you haven't already signed up to this app, you can do so by going to my bio and clicking the website link. It's then really simple to sign up. You just fill your info in on this page and then choose which plan you'd like. I would fully recommend the annual plan. And then click where it says promo and enter my exclusive code ALEX50 and you will get 50% off whichever plan you choose. So if you choose the annual one, for example, it's going to cost you less than 30 pence a week. It's an absolute no-brainer. Go and give it a watch, and I would love it if you'd come back here and let me know what you think.
The death of Heath Ledger was one of the most tragic things to ever happen to Hollywood. So if you don't know who Heath Ledger was, he was a very famous actor that hailed from Australia. And I would argue that his most famous role that he ever played was the Joker in 2008's The Dark Knight. So Heath Ledger was in a number of huge movies, including 10 Things I Hate About You, Lords of Dogtown, Brokeback Mountain, and yes, The Dark Knight. So at the time of his death, Heath was one of the biggest rising stars in all of Hollywood. He had told his friends that he aspired to direct films himself when he was older, and he had been attached to a number of big projects before his passing. So after Heath accepted the role as the Joker in The Dark Knight, he started to change. He had told the press before that when he took on some of these bigger roles, he couldn't sleep. But he stated that after taking on the role of the Joker, his insomnia was incredibly harsh. These problems with insomnia had led Heath to actually sleep only around 2 hours a night while he was filming the movie. This led him to take Ambien pills, but those pills didn't work. In the time leading up to his death, Heath actually thought that he was suffering from some sort of respiratory infection. He was having difficulty sleeping and breathing. He felt like this was related to filming in some of the damp conditions that he was in. And he was telling all of his friends and co-workers that he just couldn't sleep, and that's why he was taking so many different pills. It was widely reported before his death that Heath Ledger struggled with substance abuse, but this would all come to a head on January 22nd, 2008. On that day, Heath Ledger's housekeeper and massage therapist actually found his unconscious body in his loft. It was around 3 p.m. in New York City, And shortly after he was discovered, EMTs and medical personnel arrived at his apartment, but unfortunately he was already dead. After the autopsy was performed and a toxicology report was taken, it was revealed that Heath Ledger died from an overdose from a number of different drugs. When he died, oxycodone, hydrocodone, diazepam, temazepam, alprazolam, and other drugs were found in his system. He had taken Xanax, hydros, oxys, all sorts of drugs, and this had obviously led to his death. Heath's death was so shocking and so sudden that it created international headlines, and authorities even opened investigations into his doctors, but no charges were ever brought against anybody. And to this day, it's still unknown how Heath actually got access to the oxys and the hydros that he had taken on the day of his death. So Heath actually died before The Dark Knight was ever released theatrically. And upon the film's release, it became a box office smash. It broke a ton of world records. And he was awarded a posthumous Academy Award. Yes, he won Best Supporting Actor at the Academy Awards in 2009, even though at the time he had already passed away. I remember when this happened, I loved The Dark Knight when I was younger. This was so sad to find out, and obviously rest in peace to Heath Ledger. He's definitely missed.
This is the dark side of trick-or-treating. Multiple sightings of this clown were reported in Denver on Halloween night, and many of the reports claim that this person was handing out candy in different neighborhoods. Now, most adults didn't let their kids get anywhere near the clown, but a few unsupervised children grabbed candy from him. Candy that was collected as evidence showed disturbing images and satanic verses on the wrappers. A few of the children that ate the candy were actually monitored in a hospital overnight and deemed okay by doctors, but a few of them have now reported an inability to sleep. And one 10-year-old boy has reported an overwhelming desire to go find this clown, who he told his parents lives in the woods behind the school. Police are now looking for any other information the Denver community might have on this person.
This is one of the biggest twists in a UK true crime case that I've ever come across. It was 2015 in Cambridgeshire. Ricardas Pusis, originally from Lithuania, came to the UK for a better life. He was a hard-working man and got a job on a local leek farm. However, things would take a horribly dark turn for Ricardas. He vanished in September 2015. Police were informed that he had left work in Chatteris on the 26th of September. He then met up with a group of other Lithuanian men socially that evening. However, the alarm was raised when he didn't show up to work 2 days later. Concerningly, his ID badge was then found in a local park. Police received shocking tip-offs stating that he'd been exploited, and they launched a murder investigation in November 2015. They utilised all resources they had to try and attempt to find his body. Then in December, a breakthrough. A 31-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder. Despite having not found Ricardas, the investigation was progressing. The man was questioned about his contact with Ricardas prior to him going missing. Disturbingly, witnesses reported that the pair had got into a physical altercation after the man told Ricardas that he owed him £1,000. The man then allegedly hit Ricardas over the head and blood had been pouring out. Ricardas was then shockingly beaten with a pole and was seen stumbling around. That was the last time the witnesses saw him. However, despite this disturbing account, the man was released by police. Frustratingly, the case hit a lot of dead ends and the police were stumped. Then, 4 years later, in 2019, his sister got a Facebook message. She had obviously feared the worst for her brother after the original murder investigation. However, the Facebook message was of somebody claiming to be Ricardas. She told police she was convinced it was her brother. Investigators actually traced the profile and found that it was being used through the Wi-Fi of a nearby Asda. They obviously had suspicions that this may just be somebody posing as the missing man. An agonising 6 months later, after trained negotiators stepped in, Ricardas was found alive. Astonishingly, he'd actually been living in the woods off Harecroft Road for 5 years. He had a makeshift hut and kept himself remarkably clean. He'd scavenged for food and used old discarded clothing that he found. He even found someone's old phone and was able to use it through the Asda Wi-Fi. He avoided people and stayed in his hut throughout the day. Understandably scared and vulnerable, Ricardas was spoken to by police officers who tried to reassure him. He would eventually speak about his experience. He stated about the beating before he disappeared. "It was very painful. I couldn't stand up. I turned around to the door and ran. I didn't know where to go. I turned left. There was a little park. I went to the park and hid in the bushes. The man that was actually released by police during the investigation currently has a warrant out for his arrest over allegations of modern slavery.
I have been tasked with creating a realistic looking 2-year-old. So that means that it is a fake person that does not really exist, often created with different components of photos that were loaded into the program to create a fake person. This particular tactic is definitely a first for SOSA. Never did I think I'd be retouching an AI photo of a baby. Incoming.
Accepting.
Earlier this week, a lifeguard in Malibu, California opened up a barrel that was on the beach only to find a body inside, and now a homicide investigation is underway. This past Sunday, a maintenance worker at the Malibu Lagoon State Beach saw a black plastic barrel floating in the lagoon and brought it in with a kayak. He didn't open it at the time, but the next morning, a lifeguard on duty spotted the same barrel back out in the lagoon. He swam out and brought it back into the beach, and when he noticed how heavy it was, he opened it to see what was inside. And that's when he found a man's body. The origin of the barrel is unclear, but it's possible that it was brought in with the tide from the ocean. The man's identity has still yet to be remained as well, and homicide detectives are now investigating and have not released many details. However, they did note that the foot did not look very decomposed, indicating that the body may have not been in there very long. Investigators are also looking into security footage in the area to try to determine where the barrel may have come from and who may have disposed of it. Like I said, they have yet to identify the remains, and the investigation is ongoing. But this is just so eerie, and I hope they can figure it out quickly.
He's calling, he's calling.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question I was kind of confused about.
Alright, what's the question?
Are you like my boyfriend or my dad?
Oh, we can make up our own little dynamic.
We have a new ACM who reached out to Abby on Omegle. We're calling him the Gray Man. His character is entirely gray from his Snapchat profile. He is only following children and is only followed by children.
I think it's very scary to know that there's men just hunting and looking for 12-year-olds.
I mean, if I was your dad, wouldn't be upsetting, getting or something like that.
I think it is too risky to do a meet if we don't know who we're dealing with. He is sophisticated. This is a chess match. Get ready. He's driving. Tell him he's driving. There's a lot of risk here, but come hell or high water, we have to get him.
Some are calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case.
What? Nothing there, mate.
Look at that. What? Look at that.
If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.
The day after Sheila and Rachel ended Skylar's life, Rachel the next morning went to church camp, but what Sheila did is quite literally disgusting. The next day, Skylar's parents were freaking out. They had no idea where she was. And so her mom began to call Skylar's friends and family. And when Skylar's mom called Sheila, Sheila went over to Skylar's house, met with her mom and dad, sat on Skylar's bed, cried with her mother, wondering when Skylar was going to come home. So she ended her life the night prior, then was sitting on Skylar's bed, consoling her mom, telling her that everything was going to be okay and that Skylar would come home and that they would find her. And not only did she do that, but she literally tweeted, and I quote, "We really did go on 3." And that to me just shows how messed up of a person she is. And when Rachel came back from church camp, they continued to put up this whole facade of, oh my gosh, where's our best friend? What happened to her? Where is she? For about 5 months. These girls were full on in the fall when school started, went back to school. They were walking around high school like absolutely nothing. And granted, they were suspects and they were being interrogated throughout the school year. And there were rumors going around Morgantown that they did it, but nothing was ever solidified. But in December of 2012, Rachel had an insane mental breakdown. Then a week later, she called her lawyers and she said, I need to tell you something. And that's when she told the cops that they did it.
How did this woman go from looking like this to looking like this?
This is the very heartbreaking case of Charla Nash. One day in 2009, Charla received a call from a friend. Her friend's pet chimpanzee named Travis had sadly escaped from the house and was running loose in the neighborhood. Now, Charla had known this chimp for years, and being as kind as she was, she offered to help lure the chimp back inside. Charla arrived at her friend's house, not suspecting the danger that awaited her. As she approached Travis, the chimp suddenly turned on her, and with a ferocity that is beyond belief, the 200-pound animal mauled her face and hands, causing devastating injuries. In a complete panic, Charla's friend made this call.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Katie. What's
the
Send
problem?
the police! Send the police!
What's the problem there?
The chimp killed my friend!
When police arrived on scene, the chimp was shot, and Sharla was rushed to hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries, including a face transplant. Despite medical intervention, Sharla did end up losing her hands, her eyes, and her nose in the attack. She was also left completely blind and disfigured. Now, this incident completely shook the community. It received widespread media coverage, ultimately raising awareness about the dangers of owning exotic pets. For more 7 Sin crime stories, remember to follow.